Thank you, everyone, for coming. One of the consequences of living in a culture where novels are less central than they once were is that it's become harder and harder for us to speak about them as novels. We often prefer instead to speak about who wrote them. So Yasmin Zaher is spoken about as a Palestinian writer. Reeta Chakrabarti, of course, inescapably as a distinguished broadcaster. If we're not speaking about who wrote them, and I should say on that, not that long ago, a lot of people read John Steinbeck and didn't know what he looked like. Now, we're more likely to know what Chimamanda Adichie looks like, maybe even than to read her. But if we're not talking about who wrote a novel, we instead speak about it as if it's an op-ed or a thesis. Writers are asked what their books are about, what they have to say, not really about how they might say what they have to say. So I'm going to try to steer clear of a lot of that and focus on these novels as novels, which is what they are. And they do have some things in common, including a really very serious concern with identity. Not an uncomplicated concern with identity in various ways. They're absolutely concerned with the impact of history on individual lives, the legacies of history, of colonial history, among other things, on families, shall we say, more broken families than happy ones. They're both told in part by young women. But they're also very different. And I want to draw some of those differences out and try to get to grips with each of them individually also. We'll begin with The Coin, which, as you just heard, is the most recent winner of probably the most prestigious prize in the English language for new writing, which is the Dylan Thomas Prize for Literature. It's a book that could be placed in various traditions, the New York novel, among others. I don't know if I'd call it coming of age if the person doesn't necessarily come of age. It may or may not be a comedy. We'll come to that. It's certainly very funny, whether or not it's a comedy. It is about a young Palestinian woman, mostly living in New York, although we venture to Paris at one point. We venture back in time occasionally to her childhood in Israel and Palestine, and to the history of her family. She's orphaned. She has what to some people would feel like a lot of money, but crucially doesn't have access to most of the money that is rightfully hers. She is a teacher of a very unconventional kind. But really what she is, I think, to me, above all, is an unforgettable voice. Again, we'll come back to that. But I want to start, Yasmin, by just hearing the backstory. Every book has a backstory. So just tell us about when you started writing it, how you came to write it, what that process was.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all for being here and for this very generous introduction. The genesis of The Coin is, I had tried writing other novels beforehand, but I never got to the end of them because I was very concerned with structure and logic and plot and things that were very inhibiting for me. And I think The Coin really came from a place of liberty and lack of inhibition in the writing. I think that's the first thing that I could really recognize about it, is that there's a kind of wildness to that voice. And it's that very energetic seed that was able to carry me to the end of the writing, unlike in my previous attempts. So yeah, I would say it's really a kind of a wild book. And what inspired me to write like that was that I had just read Clarice Lispector. I read The Passion According to G.H., which is a book about a woman who has a nervous breakdown after finding a cockroach in her apartment. And it's a book that has no logic. It's just completely irrational. She writes one sentence, then she contradicts herself in the next sentence. Sometimes she doesn't really finish the sentence. And I was so touched by its freedom that, yeah, for me, there was no going back as a writer after I had read that.
And tell us just a little bit, because I think people are always interested, about the publishing experience. So once you had written it, like once you'd written a draft of it, what happened next?
Years passed. No, the publishing is not very fond of wild, experimental, senseless novels. There's an impulse to categorize and make sense and package, to something that you can package, really. And to this day, I have no idea how they were able to write the back of the book, because it's a book that is really very hard to summarize and describe. So there was a lot of negotiation and going back and forth with editors to try to make it more conventional. And a part of me wanted that too, because I wanted to communicate to my readers. I wanted to be somewhat understood by them as well. I didn't want to just, yell into the heavens. But at the same time, it was very important for me to keep the first essence of the book.
Clarice Lispector, for those of you who haven't read her, is a great Brazilian novelist, short story writer, unclassifiable, I think, in general, but has had a real revival in English in the last 20 years or so, and a major biography as well by Benjamin Moser. We're going to come back to many of the things you raised later, but before we move on to the first time to Reeta, just one question about the process. There's a very memorable line, there are many memorable lines in your book about Palestine, what it means to be Palestinian, the perception of Palestine in the West, etc. But the one that I think is relevant to the publishing journey of this book is, so your narrator goes, we'll come back to why she's in Paris, but she goes into a shop in Paris, and there's a Malaysian Muslim sales guy. It's an Hermes. She's buying an Hermes bag, or trying to. And actually, I'll read it out because it's worth quoting. So here's what Yasmin's narrator says. I told him I was Palestinian and had just become a citizen of Armenia. Sometimes, maybe even most of the time, telling a stranger that you're Palestinian is a handicap. It makes people withdraw from you. It makes them unsure or suspicious. But other times, it's like showing a hand of 4 aces. You get a pat on your back, you get Yasser Arafat's V sign, you get free stuff. So now there's a whole separate question about, the fact that you are about the unimaginable horror of what is happening in Palestine and to Palestinians. But was there any element of you are a Palestinian writer and the publishing industry was more interested in you at this time?
I don't know, more interested, less interested. What's for sure is that there's a certain expectation, and that you're writing I write against that expectation, so maybe that makes it a little bit more difficult for me. But I think a lot of writers of a certain identity come across that. They are sort of expected to give a certain message, or to be a spokesperson, or to say the right thing. And that is probably one of the deadliest things that you could do to an artist.
Especially because it's never done to French or British or American artists. Doris Lessing used to say that the challenge for writers from South Africa is because of the injustice of what's happened, the scale of the injustice in South Africa. Writers are not allowed to write except in a very earnest, righteous mode. You can't write satire, you can't write comedy. And I think that it's a sort of measure of the heading is Brave New Novel. So one of the forms of bravery is to also write against the expectations of people in London or New York. So before we come back to the coin, Reeta Chakrabarti. Finding Belle I actually think also writes against the expectations or against the current of a lot of contemporary fiction in a way that I really appreciate it, because we live in this country in particular in an era where words like cozy, healing, comfort are applied to books to make you want to buy them. I personally, these words make me want to run as far as I can in the opposite direction. But one of the, this is a book that is specifically in conversation with one particular classic novel, but it's also in a tradition which goes back at least to Victorian fiction, if not further, of using the novel to interrogate the most serious moral questions. And questions like, what are the moral obligations of a spouse when their spouse becomes very ill in a way that is really difficult to deal with? Those are not easy situations. Your book does not present them as easy. Finding Belle is largely, not entirely, told by Mivy, Belle's daughter, who grows up in England in the 70s and 80s as a mixed-race child, the daughter of a white father and Indian via East Africa mother, who is Bella, who then becomes Belle. And Belle, I think we can just say, has a very serious case of postnatal depression with elements of psychotic illness as well. And this is not the start of Belle's troubles, but this then sort of defines the rest of the characters' lives. And Reeta takes us on a journey from Milton Keynes to back to Mombasa, forward to Kolkata. It is I don't know if saga is the right word, because it covers about 20 years, but it is also intergenerational. So it is a family saga. So tell us, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Yasmin. So how did you come to write the book, and what was that journey like?
Well, hello everybody. Thank you very much for giving up some of your Sunday afternoon to come and listen to us. I appreciate it. It's a lovely day outside, and it's great to see you all here. I have had a career, as a lot of you know, as a journalist and a broadcaster, but there was always an itch in me to write. And it was one of those itches that I got a little bit sort of embarrassed about, because, everybody who studied literature wants to write a novel, and you sort of feel, well, how can I write a novel when there are so many masterpieces out there? But then 2020 happened, lockdown, and I thought, it's now or never. I've finally got the time to do it. And so I started writing. There's no point writing anything unless you've got an idea, is there? And I was an author in search of an idea for a very long time, but shortly before 2020, I had reread for the umpteenth time one of my most favorite Victorian novels, which is Jane Eyre, and you probably guessed from Keshava's description of my novel what it was. And Jane Eyre is one of those books that I have read probably in every decade of my life. So I first picked it up when I was 8 years old, not because I was very precocious, but because I read a lot of Enid Blyton, and Bronte was next to Blyton on the library shelf, and so I picked it up. And what I made of the mad woman in the attic, and the betrayal, and the lust, and the passion, and so on, I don't know. But I did remember Jane as being a very lost, neglected girl, and it stayed with me, and I would write school essays about her. Anyway, I spent, over the years, I reread this novel, and my attitude to the characters changed enormously. So I went from being fascinated by young Jane to being enthralled to the great romance between Jane and Rochester, to thinking what a bastard Rochester is. He locks his wife up in the attic, he torments poor Jane, he flirts with Blanche, he has a child probably with Céline Varens. And so my novel is I would say a 21st century take on a 19th century novel. It's not in any sense a retelling of Jane Eyre, so please don't think it's that. And also if you haven't read Jane Eyre, although I'm sure most of you have, don't feel you're going to get the same again, because it's not that. But, for those of you who know it and love it, and I hope you love it, because it's not a criticism of the novel, it is, you will see the layers that there are in there. Yeah.
So just to stay on Jane Eyre for a moment, in the 21st century, we don't just read Jane Eyre, or if you're reading Jane Eyre or writing inspired by Jane Eyre, you also have White Sargasso Sea in between. So was that, specifically because that was a engagement with the colonial aspects of Jane Eyre, and your book is also very interested in similar questions. Was that a novel that was important to you at all?
Yeah, very much so, very much so. But Jean Rhys, White Sargasso Sea is an extraordinary novel. It's so powerful, and I read that again quite recently. Her White Sargasso Sea is a prequel to Jane Eyre, and it very much takes on the story of Rochester and Bertha. She calls Bertha Antoinette, and it is much more closely tied to Jane Eyre and also to that period of history when, I mean, Jean Rhys was brought up in Martinique. So she evokes that whole environment wonderfully, and she ties it to that period in history when slaves had been, those who were enslaved had been freed, and yet they had no power, and what that then did to their white colonial masters, or those who had been their masters not very long ago. And she paints this amazing portrait of what it must have been like for Rochester going into that and marrying Bertha stroke Antoinette. I've done something different. So my novel starts off in the 1970s, and I have my Bertha character, who is Belle. I have her coming from she's an East African Indian. And I did that because I wanted to sort of concentrate the migrant experience. So she's a migrant twice over, or her family is. They've come from India to Kenya, and then she goes from Kenya to Milton Keynes to marry Fairfax. And of course, as you all know, the 1970s were a time where East African Asians were, you know, the climate was turning against them, and it reached its nadir in Uganda in 1972 when Idi Amin kicked people out. Now, I don't address these things directly, but they're there.
And then, quite unusually for the time, she's actually the product of a mixed Indian marriage because her mother is Bengali and her father is Gujarati.
Yes,
so
yes, that's right.
So she's, yes, so there's that aspect to it too. It's so interesting, again, for as different as these books are in so many ways. One connecting thread is Jean Rhys, because as I was reading The Coin, I often did think of, not of White Sargasso Sea, but of Jean Rhys's, the female narrators in Jean Rhys's earlier novels, After Leaving Mr. Mackenzie, Good Morning Midnight. I don't know if those are important to you at all, but there are some resonances there. One more question on the backstory to Finding Belle, which is, once you'd written it, what was the experience of publication like? And because it's both a privilege and a burden to be well known for something else.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it. And I had, if there are expectations on you, Yasmin, to write a Palestinian novel, well, there are expectations on me to write a memoir. And my publishers would much rather that I'd written something factual, I think. Now, I say that I'm hugely grateful to HarperCollins, and it is wonderful to be published by them. But they were very worried, for example, by the way in which the book would be presented. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it. The cover is lovely. It's of the main character, Mivi, and in profile, superimposed. So she's looking, she's trying to work out what's going on. And there's a wonderful sort of Indian type deep wallpaper of the sort you might have found in a Bangladeshi restaurant in the 1970s. And in the back, there is this silhouetted character who I suppose is Belle. But a long time went into working out how this novel should look, because there were various other covers that I really liked, but that were rejected by the publisher repeatedly because they kept saying, people will think it's a memoir, people will think it's a memoir. And they think the very fact that it's got my name on it will lead people to think that it is something factual. Yeah. So we've had to work hard to make clear that it isn't.
Going to come back to some of those things again. But moving back now to The Coin and to something that really struck me, which is just the language of your novel. I said it was in the tradition of the New York novel, but it's also in another tradition, which is novels in English, or American novels, by writers for whom English is not their only language. You've written elsewhere that Arabic is your mother tongue. You also grew up speaking Hebrew. And so I've got lots of questions about the language of the novel. But I guess let's start there. So tell us about your relationship to English. I mean, not just why, not why write in English, but what do you think, like, what do you bring to, like, what is your English?
My English is definitely not a native. It's very good, but it's not a native. It's not the English of a native speaker.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of like language tics in a way in my when I'm writing. It has a kind of texture that I think some people can see that it's not really my that I that I'm not British or American. I don't believe in language purity or whatever that is.
Yeah.
Like I'm completely. It's not at all how I see the world. So I don't see why not adapt language and and write in another language, and I would like to write in other languages in my life as well.
Yeah. So one of the tics in this novel, and I think it is a tic because it doesn't let up from sentence one, from sentence two to the end of the book, is you love run-on sentences. So you don't like any punctuation mark except for a comma.
Absolutely not.
No semicolons, no colons, and it's very interesting because if you think about classical English prose, which aims at a kind of technical perfection, and there's two writers in the 20th century who I think, or late 20th century, who really went for this, who are V.S. Naipaul and J.M. Coetzee, where you could tell that they don't want to make a single mistake in a single sentence because they want to write better English than the English, almost. But you have a very different approach.
Yeah, can you imagine my horror when I received the copy edit and there were 300 semicolons entered into the manuscript?
Okay, but so what exactly is so wrong about semicolons?
It's just not. It's not me. It's not the character. It's too pedantic.
Yeah.
And this is as I said, this is a novel of freedom.
Yeah, I mean,
and simplicity, and it's contemporary, and it's New York.
And it's a voice that is it is careening, right? It is going from one thought to the next and back again,
and it's conversational.
Exactly. But another, I wouldn't call this a tic. I would call this a stylistic feature. If I don't know if any of you here are fans of noir fiction, so not like just the stuff that became film noir, so like Raymond Chandler or James M. Cain or any Dashiell Hammett, and one of the things that those writers were masters of is simile, and in Yasmin, similarly, you almost always go for simile, not metaphor, which is so yes, it has. Let me try to see if I have a good example. Yeah, let me see if where's my copy of the coin? But it yeah. This is a great example. And also an example of, I think, the book's humor. I wrap my Laura Piana scarf around my head and ears, not like Grace Kelly in a convertible, but like a hijabi in Islamophobic France. And it's that knowing exactly when to deploy it, exactly when to end the sentence, and it has that noir writer's crispness. The sentences, these sentences, your sentences, I just say they run on, but sometimes they're never a word too long. And do you achieve that through lots of revision, or is that how you naturally write?
A lot of revision too, but I think it's also a question of rhythm.
Yeah.
Rhythm is very important, I think, when you're writing and when you're reading. And I try to pay a lot of attention to that when I'm writing. That's why also I read what I write out loud,
Yeah.
so I can hear it and make sure that there's not one beat too much.
I got to say, I'm sorry if there are any copy editors in the audience, but it is every writer's nightmare because we've put so much thought into these sentences, and they are written to our ear. And then you have somebody else who doesn't believe in the concept of ear, who only believes in the concept of right and wrong.
And they add a comma.
Yeah, and they had a comma. And these are fights that we shouldn't have to fight. But staying on the question of language, Reeta, you've had an entire career of journalistic training in, I suppose, probably clear and accurate and concise language. Did you have some unlearning to do?
Yes, I did. Absolutely have unlearning to do. Not many people read my first drafts, but those that did said I needed to let go of certain journalistic practices, which is exactly that. Because for broadcast, everything is exactly pithy. Of course, it's factual, but it's got to be pithy. It's got to be very clear, because you listen to it once and it's gone. And I did have to just start to enjoy and play with language, and not just the language, but what you can do with language. So use suspense, use irony, use hinting, give a little sort of suggestion of what is to come. And all of these are completely, of course, inimical to news writing. But I was very interested that you said you read your manuscripts out, because that's so broadcast. You know, that's exactly what I do in the news. I read out everything that I write, because it's got to be right to the ear.
It's a kind of music.
Yes.
I mean, I don't want to get sidetracked, but like people forget this when they because broadcasters have to use teleprompters or autocue, they forget that you've written it for that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think some people are surprised that I write my own scripts,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I do. You know, some people think that you just turn up. One of my colleagues is in the audience over there, Justin. He will know this very well. You know, people think that we turn up an hour before and we put a bit of makeup on, wear a nice jacket and read the news. You know, it's not that. You're there many hours before. We are senior journalists on the team,
Yeah.
and we're writing our own stuff. Yeah.
Your book, Finding Belle, it's mostly first person, bits of third person, journals. Tell us about the role those different forms play and why you chose to move between them.
Well, my main character, Mivi, is in the first person. She wasn't originally, actually. She was in the third person. And this is, I mean, I don't mind sharing this with you. You know, this is my first novel, and it didn't come out fully formed. It wasn't like giving birth. This is the result of many, many iterations, refining, polishing, changing, sometimes committing, you know, drastic surgery. And my editor kept saying to me, it's good, it's good, it's good, but there's just something missing. We're not quite close enough to Mivi. Why aren't we close enough? And I must say it was her genius idea to turn her into the first person. And then, of course, she's the person that you sympathize with. She's your protagonist. And it distinguishes her from everybody else. She's not an angel, you know, she's a complicated character, as they all are, but she's the one that you are closest to.
I mean, so much so that by the end of the book, no spoilers, it's called Finding Belle. It could just as easily be called Finding Mivi.
Yeah, no, it could be called Finding Mivi, but it's Mivi's searching that we are engaged with. And you asked also about the journals. So the journals are written by Belle, her mother, and Belle is always to a certain extent going to stay unknowable. We learn more of her through her journals, but that idea of finding is a constant really throughout the novel, and possibly even by the end of the novel too.
With both Mivi and with Belle, they have two names. And there is a question around, you know, not which is the real name, but what each of the names signify. Well, your narrator, of course, doesn't have a name. I would say that's one of the ways in which you are not writing against the grain, because nameless narrators have never been, like, it's like the present tense and not having a name are like, your novel is 2025. So what's the significance of not having a name?
Well, in first person, you don't really need a name. Yeah. It's very easy to get away with it. And I think, like, if I'm very honest, I just didn't have the right name, whereas I easily had all the names of the other characters.
Well,
and
yeah.
If we speak about rhythm and changing, like, it's very difficult to suddenly insert a name or change a name in a manuscript, because it completely throws off the rhythm of every sentence.
And the characters, two of the characters that we see the most, apart from your narrator, Sasha and Trenchcoat. Well, Sasha, we don't really see that much. And Trenchcoat, we don't know his name because she calls him Trenchcoat. And we don't know that he knows her name.
No, and we don't know where he's from either, which was something that my editor kept pushing me to say where Trenchcoat is from, but I also left him kind of unknown in a way. I want to say about I love the sections of Belle's diaries. And in my novel, in the first draft, we also had the diaries of the character. And my agent had convinced me that because it's already in the first person and we already know the character so well and we're so close to her, we don't need the diaries. But in the case of Belle, because she's unknown, that's how we know her.
Yes, absolutely. Fascinating.
And I think it is also really true that somebody of Mivi's age, you might get to know you might find letters or diaries later and learn about your mother, the real story about your mother that way, or medical records, or whatever the case may be. With the coin, I can't let people not hear about how important the difference between clean and dirty is in this novel. And especially from an Indian perspective, because I kept thinking when I was reading this book. So the narrator of the coin is fastidious about cleanliness. This fastidiousness, she's always in pursuit of cleanliness. Because the thing about cleanliness is there's no such thing as 100% clean. There's always another layer to get to. And for an Indian reader, it's often been observed that India has the world's cleanest homes and dirtiest cities. We have a very ambivalent relationship to cleanliness. We are both obsessed with it and completely comfortable with its absence. She is living in New York, which is, for all that it's kind of Dubai levels of inequality, is not the Dubai level of clean. And it maybe it's going in the other direction. So is this, I don't even know if I have a question. I mean, I just think it's such a distinctive and brilliantly rendered concern of this book.
I think it's not a coincidence that that's how you felt, because for me too, when I think about it, it's cultural.
Yeah.
I grew up in obviously in not in clean streets, but in obsessively clean homes.
Yeah.
And that is something that I observed in the women of my family, is a madness for cleanliness that I think is cultural and also very gendered as well. Like it's the woman's role to create this order in the home when the outside world is chaos. And I think that's where it came from for me.
Yes. I think it's also, there's other aspects to it. I mean, you talk very interestingly in the book about how Palestine is its own thing. It's not the third world. It's not the first world. Your narrator says she's never been to a third world country. And also there's a I think brilliant, again, I want to, as you can see, I keep wanting to read things out, but there's a brilliant line about how, and I just thought this is exactly what American readers need to hear because they don't know it. Because American readers think that Americans can think that the whole world has American racial categories. As any Indian knows, there are plenty of racists in India as well. But here's what Yasmin's narrator writes. I knew that Europeans like Paul were racist and that they looked down on people like us. I knew this because I felt the same about Mexicans, Native Americans, Ukrainians, Africans, and all kinds of East and South Asians. The racial hierarchy is not dichotomous, which I thought is the first time I've ever seen the word dichotomous used in a funny sentence. But these racial categories are very important in your book as well, because Mivi's own status is so ambiguous. But because one of the things we see, for example, is the way you deal with the Indian obsession with being fair-skinned.
Yes, I do. Tangentially, I mean, it's not central to the novel. I mean, to a certain extent, my treatment of identity and skin and how people look is tied to the period in which I've written this, because I'm assuming that the coin is roughly set in the present day, whereas my novel starts off in the 1970s and ends up not quite in the present day, maybe at the beginning of this century. And I made a conscious decision to do that because I write my main character as a child, and I could do that most realistically by writing about the 1970s, which is when I was a child. And this was a time when the UK, many of you will remember this, was, I think, a harsher cruder, more raw place when it came to race relations, and how it viewed people. Now, I said this once to another book event where I was, and a man who was, I think, in his 70s, he was white, and he came up to me and he said, you know, you said that. Actually, it was just a harsher, rawer place, full stop. It didn't matter who you were, and I thought that was a very interesting thing to say. Anyway, I don't deal with that in this novel. I do deal with Mivi's experience, and she's mixed race, but at school she is viewed as Asian, black. It doesn't really matter. She's just viewed as different. And, well, you will see, because I don't want to tell you everything that happens. I hope you'll read it. But, you know, she has a difficult time, as, of course, does her mother.
But I found, look, the portrayal of race relations or racial categories at school is very moving and very intense. But I was very struck by this moment when her mother is ill and her mother's friend Mira comes over, and Mivi says, Mira was the most beautiful person I had ever seen. She looked like my idea of a flamenco dancer with thick black hair and skirts that swished and swayed as she walked. And it was so interesting to me because what she's seen at school has not made her idealize a British idea of beauty.
No, that's right. And I think, you see, Mivi because Mivi is forced to feel uncomfortable about her own skin, she starts to reject her mother who wears a sari. She finds that embarrassing because she doesn't want to be marked out as different. But the thing about Mira is she turns up in Western dress. She turns up in a maxi dress, and suddenly there's this idea for this little girl that you can be a grown-up Indian woman and you can be cool. Because in the 1970s, being Indian/Asian was not cool.
And there's another moment like that, which is this: she forms this friendship with this girl called Tabitha, and Tabitha calls her mother by her name. And then Mivi comes home and starts calling her parents by their first names as well.
Yes, yes. I think I did that. So she starts the novel by saying, calling them Mama and Daddy, but she then calls them Belle and Fairfax. And there's a distancing that happens there, isn't there? You know, you stop using the word Mum and Dad, and she's the only person who would call them Mum and Dad, but they stop, and it is because, as you will see in the novel, their ability to parent actually diminishes.
Yes. And it is that there's 5 or 10 pages there where the whole novel turns, because if they don't lose the second child, then she isn't the only person called the mum and dad. Everything is different. I mean, it is one of those books that turns on a moment very early in the narrative, and the rest of it kind of unspools from there. I'm going to open up in a few minutes. I'm sure we've got lots of questions. I want to just ask one or two more. To Yasmin, one of the things this book does, which not that many serious, and for as funny as it is, it's a very, very, very serious book. Serious fiction doesn't really engage with very much, is the world of luxury brands. It's very funny, it's very specific. I had one quibble, which is that I thought someone as fastidious as your narrator would be a bit more snooty about the fact that these brands are all now, using the same Chinese factories, and they're all polyester, and she might go in search of something a bit more artisanal and natural, and but again, maybe that's just cultural. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, I did have a phase in all the fashion research that I did, where I had to make sure that the wardrobe that she describes very much in detail was somewhat ethical as well.
Yeah.
So she's wearing like certain recycled cashmeres.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, she's so obsessive that of course she would be obsessed with that as well.
So yeah, we alluded to somebody called Trenchcoat. Again, not really giving the plot away, but there's this, the whole brilliant midsection of the book involves them going off to Paris to try to sell Birkin bags, because the thing about Birkin bags is that their supply is artificially restricted. And so if you're able to get hold of, it's one of the only things where the minute you walk out of the store, the value goes up, not down. And it is to me, like, after the pandemic, we've just seen this insane bubble, which is now finally receding in the world of luxury fashion. And this is the first novel I think that really, deals with that seriously.
And for me, it was less about the fashion and more about the really like a sociological phenomenon where you go into a store and you have to perform a certain kind of class and wealth to be able to buy something. So it's really about like performing class, which I thought was interesting.
And before I open up, often writers don't like to talk about what they're doing next, but in your case, I know both of you are working on or have written next novels. So something similar, something very different. What are you doing next?
It's something very different. It's not a sequel or a prequel. It's a novel about an artist, and I can't say any more because I feel superstitious about it.
And Yasmin?
Very different also. It takes place in Palestine, which has a whole other set of challenges. Also, it's more classical, more formal, less free.
Okay, so with that, let's open up. I mean, I have more questions if need be, but who would like to go first? I see lots of questions over here. Yeah. We can't hear you.
I know. Oh,
Oh,
you
yeah.
can
Oh,
now.
yeah,
Hi. I wanted to say that I loved finding Belle, and I found her, the protagonist, Mivy, to be so incredibly moving. In a way, almost it put me in mind of To Kill a Mockingbird, in the sense of very serious things are happening, and she's this unreliable narrator. It was very touching and powerful. She's a character that stayed with me, and I wondered if, for both of you, your characters and your protagonists, because it's such an intimate experience, have stayed with you, and if you kind of miss them.
Thank you, Bea. That's just lovely. And To Kill a Mockingbird was another seminal book for me. And these things that you read when you're 10, they become part of you, don't they? They're sort of hardwired in you. So it's that sort of little girl trying to interpret the world type story I adore, and did write something like that. I think, I've put my characters to bed now, but while the book was being written, they were very much with me. So every so often, I'd be on the Northern Line into work, and I'd think, that's what he'd say, and I'd make a little note in my phone, or very occasionally between the 6 and 10 bulletins, I'd think, that's what should happen there, and I'd make another little note. So it was very active while I was writing it.
Likewise, I think even I wrote the character because she was already with me. But in the writing, you kind of exercise that out of you. And she's not with me anymore, thankfully.
Next question.
Thank you both for such interesting conversation. Ms. Chakrabarti, you mentioned about the
Could you
unlearning.
just speak up?
Sorry.
Hold the mic. Yeah.
Ms. Chakrabarti, you mentioned about the unlearning you had to do from your, sort of journalistic experience to sort of fiction writing. I was wondering, what, if anything, did you carry over that you think enriched your writing?
What did I carry over from my journalism?
Yeah.
Oh, that's quite difficult, actually, because I did try and, everything about my journalism is 1, accuracy, and 2, clarity. I'll let this lady finish. Yes, please don't exit. What did I carry over? I think, to be honest, it was more a question of sort of divesting myself of all the things that I said. But I would say that I continued the need to write well. I mean, for me, that is the ultimate thing about a novel. In a way, the plot, the characters, so on, of course, they're all important. But I will read a novel if it's well written, just for the joy of reading good language. And I wanted to say, Yasmin, when you were saying that English is not your first language, I mean, I take everything that you said, I understood everything that you said about it having certain quirks, but it is fantastically written. It's so rich. It's so... I read it thinking, I wish I could write like you. So, kudos.
Very quickly, Yasmin, you're also a journalist. So what's the relationship between your journalistic writing and your...
What I took was not fearing the white page. Like, I'm not afraid to, and that's something that I got from working in breaking news and having to write all the time very fast.
over here.
I have a very naive and a very broad question at the same time addressed to both of you. Is when you talk about the rhythm, which comes up in conversations, is important to you. How do you define it? How do you find it? How do you replicate it? How does that? How do you discover it? And if you can talk more about it, yeah. Thank you.
If I were a musical person, I would tell you, but it's completely a feeling. It's just feeling like a sentence is starting in the right place, ending in the right place, going up, going down. It's completely conceptual. It's something that you feel, and I think everybody has it.
So Yasmin's novel is written really entirely in the first person, isn't it? So there is a voice to your character, whereas I have different characters. So there is Mibby in the first person, but there are also reflections from a character called Jade, and then also from Fairfax, who is Mibby's father. And I think the rhythms for me came in the different voices. So I'll tell you one thing that, when my editor read my first draft, I hadn't really placed exactly where in the UK the action was going to take place. And she said to me, "Oh, Fairfax sounds like he's from the Midlands." And I said, "Really?" Because I hadn't made him from the Midlands, but I was brought up in Birmingham. So maybe to a certain extent I had unconsciously turned him into a Midlander. So I thought, well, where should the action take place? Because this character, Fairfax, is very aspirational. He thinks he's going to go up in the world. He's hugely vain. He's very ambitious. So ideally, he would want to be in London, but he can't afford London. So where would he be in the late 60s, early 1970s? And so I set it in Milton Keynes, which was a new town, up and coming, aspirational, and not very far from London. So that's where the rhythms, in a way, actually influence the location. Yeah.
More questions? I thought I saw more hands. Yeah.
Okay. I am 25 pages in the coin, and so far I'm tremendously enjoying it. I have a question for you. The narrator, who is in the first person, without any name, did you also intend the narrator to be, or is the narrator also at different times different people?
Interesting.
Because when the red scribble can't be wiped away because other people had been here, that tells me that the cleaner is an Israeli. And the dirt, I love the dirt. That
Thanks.
dirt and that dust, fantastic.
I think maybe this feeling that you're having of different narrators is connected to the mental instability of this character. She's not viewing life in a continuous way. In a way, there are these breaks and things are unstable and falling. I think, you will see at the end, but at the end it gets very unstable. And the dirt comes up in a whole, if you like the dirt, you will like the ending.
Yeah.
And as an ex-teacher, I like the teaching. Oh, yeah. I love it. And in fact, I thought you took inspiration from my teaching.
I think
when I used to shut the door, what I used to do sometimes, free lessons.
I'm not sure parents would feel the same way about the teaching. It's the kind of teaching which I think students appreciate more than parents.
And that's why they learn then more.
Okay, more questions?
This is for Reeta as well as Yasmin. Once again, a very naive and very broad question. When you write a book, and now you have written a book and published it, do you also think that the book could be converted into a movie? Because, you might have heard of Chetan Bhagat. Whatever book he writes it in a script. And Reeta, you have been writing script for news, and that's what you're talking about. So I think both Bollywood and Hollywood, they seriously lack, good content and good storyline. And that's why they keep making sequels like, Spider-Man 1, Spider-Man 2, Godfather 1, Godfather 2, Terminator 1, 2, Toy Story 1, 2, then Drishyam 1, 2, even Amar Akbar Anthony, they're making another sequel. and these books, you know, if it has got a good content and a good story, then it should not be in shelves or in the living room of only, you know, certain sect of people. With the openness of OTT and others, there is a good way that it can reach the mainstream media, you know, and that's movie, you know. So do you ever think about that?
So just so Chetan Bhagat is
Yeah.
genuinely obscure actually outside India, but very hugely best-selling writer in India he's very open about the fact that he writes with a view. His books are like the bound version of films. So they're inspired more by films than by other books, and they're always made into films, and they're always written with a view that this is like the first draft of a film script, basically. Okay, who wants to take that first?
Well, you know, I mean, if there are any producers out there with big budgets, yes, please. I mean, wouldn't it be fantastic? I certainly didn't write it with that in mind, but it is quite episodic, my novel. So, you know, please come and see me afterwards, okay?
Yeah, of course, it would be a pleasure of mine if that happened. But I think there's a quality to novels that you don't get in films, which is that they're interior. And you can write a whole novel that is the interiority of a character, and that would be very difficult to show on screen. Yeah. So I think that's why a lot of novels, and probably The Coin is one of those, are more difficult to adapt to the image because they're happening inside the mind.
Yes, back there, and here as well.
Hi, thank you so much. That was such a wonderful session. I'm just picking on what you said, Yasmin, about reading out your own writing and for the rhythm, and what you said, Reeta, about the more fundamental thing being that it's good language that's being written. And it's a tangential question because something I struggle when I'm writing fiction is that it's easier for me to find the rhythm when I'm writing descriptions, but when it comes to dialogue, I don't know whether it's supposed to be, should I focus on the good language part or the realistic aspect? And I was wondering if you had any comment on that.
Well, that's so interesting because I find exactly the reverse. I find description very difficult and dialogue quite easy, actually. But when I say quite easy, you know, I can go back to something that I've written a couple of days previously and think that that's just rubbish, you know. I am very much of the sort of, you know, writing something is much better than not writing anything at all. And even if it comes out badly, go back and look at it and refine it and then decide what you want. You know, what do you want? But dialogue has to be realistic, I think. Unless you're making some bigger point about the characters, I would have said. I don't know if you agree.
I struggle with dialogue too, and for me description is easier. And for me, I struggle with dialogue if it should be realistic, like how you write or like how Sally Rooney writes, or if it should be like every line should be, should be like a zinger, you know. And I can never decide which one it should be, and that's why in general I quite avoid dialogue.
I mean, I think the answer is, you can go one way in some books and another way in other books. I actually have a quick follow-up to that for Yasmin, because in an essay published in a magazine called The Drift, you wrote that identity, setting, language, and style are important, but that they are the body, but not the soul. So, what is the soul?
The soul is the soul.
Okay.
It's funny. I had a podcast where I was asked if I believe in the soul.
Yeah.
And I said I did. And then they asked me if I believed in armed resistance right after that question.
Okay, I did see a couple more questions over here and over here, yeah.
So this is another kind of naive question as somebody who's never written fiction, but you were talking about being a journalist, both of you being journalists, and it strikes me that one of the things that makes journalism more straightforward is the parameters of what you're writing about are set by the facts. Now, you both have started writing fictional novels. I mean, there must be a sort of vertiginous feeling of possibility as you realize you can literally do anything. That must be quite difficult. It must be difficult to marshal your thoughts and decide where you want to go.
This is a colleague of mine, by the way, so, I'll see you later on. Yes, it was difficult. As I said, it was difficult. I had to just sort of let go of certain inhibitions, I think, and the sentences initially were too short. They were too much trying to be based in fact. And I had to just roam a little bit and put myself inside these characters. So, you know, you talked about an interior life. Yours is very much an interior life. Mine is more character and plot driven. But, you know, we don't do that in our job, do we? We let our characters, i.e. our interviewees, speak for themselves, don't we? And what we do is package up their interviews and give people context, perspective, maybe history, and certainly empathy. We can be empathetic as journalists, but we don't speak for them. Whereas here, I'm speaking for them, and that really was, that was quite difficult.
Yeah, I think there's like a truth that is in fact, and then there's a truth that has nothing to do with fact. And for me, it was very refreshing to be able to write a truth that is outside, you know, suddenly there were things that I could say that I couldn't say before, that I know are also as true as the facts. It's so different. I think it's very different, journalistic writing and fiction.
Yes, over here. I think this is going to be our final question.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to read both of the books. I haven't read either of them yet, but Yasmin, your book is the book choice for my book club, so there'll be a few of us reading it quite soon. I have a question for you. So Reeta talked about how she was quite involved in the cover and designing the cover for her book. How involved were you? Because I noticed that the lady on the front, who I'm imagining is the narrator, doesn't have a face. We can't see her face. And she seems to be wearing something that looks a bit like a trench coat and Jimmy Choo's. So were you involved in the process?
Yes, absolutely. This is a photo by a German performance artist, and in fact, it's an advertisement for the shoes originally. And it just fit the book perfectly, and what I wanted was something in movement, something energetic, because the first suggestions that they gave me for the cover were very quiet and kind of somber, and this is a book that is quite explosive. Also, you will see that in the bottom corner of all the pages, there's something that looks like a smudge of dirt, but if you flip through the pages, it's a coin that flips like this. So.
And was the US cover the same, different?
It's originally the US cover.
It's the US cover. Do we have time for one last question? I know. Okay, so yes, please go out and buy and read both these books. They really show us, I think especially by being so different, they show us what novels can do. Yasmin spoke about how novels are interior and in a way that films and TV can't be. But, you know, the books are not just one form of storytelling. I mean, there are lots of things that the novel can do, things which other forms can't. And both The Coin and Finding Belle really demonstrate that. And why it's a thriving, living form, not just a classic one. Cannot recommend both of them strongly enough. Thank you, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.